Right, so you're welcome to this part of the class, and what we are going to be talking about is on cell reference when we are using Microsoft Excel. Now, if you look closely to this slide, you will see some three different arrangement of cell values. Okay, by default, whenever you click on a cell, we usually have first the column name and then the row value. And from the knowledge of cells, we know, right? So columns are lettered from A, B, C, D, E. And then for the rows, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And so forth. So um, when we are talking about cell references, maybe working with cell reference, we are basically talking about how we identify and locate, the location of data within a worksheet. Right. When you work with formulas or functions in Excel, you often refer to the values in specific cells. Right. And the way we work with cells, and when it comes to using formulas, we actually need to be very careful. Also in functions, we actually need to be careful when we are working with cells. All right. And values in our cells. Um, this topic will best be understood when we get into practice by looking at some of the examples in our data sets, right, which involve some calculations. All right. So there are three main types of cell references in Microsoft Excel. We have the relative, we have the absolute, and then we also have one. Okay, there is another one, but sometimes most people don't really include this, but it's part of something you should have at the back of your mind. We have what is called a mixed reference. Okay. Now, what is a relative reference? So this is what the relative reference does. So when you use a relative reference in a formula, so what it does in a cell is that it adjusts based on the relative position of the cell that contains the formula and the cell it refers to. So let's take, for example, that if you have a formula, all right, let's say we are working in cell C1, all right, let's say our cell C1 has a formula equals A1 plus B1. That's we are trying to sum values in cells A1 and then cell B1, and then we are trying to have the output in cell C1. All right, so let's say that we happen to copy that formula to a cell, which is C2. That's that same column, but a different row. That's row 2. From column C, row 1 to row 2. So it will automatically adjust to, all right, A2 plus B2. So this is going to be the next formula once it moves to the next cell. All right, please don't be confused. We are going to be looking at these things in real life. Now, we also have what is called the absolute reference. All right, so what an absolute reference does is that it refers to a specific cell in a formula, and it doesn't change when you copy the formula to another location. Please take note, when you are working with relative cells or relative references, once you copy that formula to a next cell, it automatically adjusts itself to, the next. It copies the formula down. Okay, if you're moving right, it copies it right. If you're moving up, it sends it up. So whichever way you're working. But when it comes to absolute, it doesn't change when you copy the formula to a different location. Now, absolute references are denoted by a dollar sign, a dollar symbol before the column letter or for the row number. So for example, if you have a formula, this formula we have here equals to then a dollar sign 1. Please note that the dollar sign is between the A and 1, right? Plus B $1. So what happens that if we have this formula in this cell C1 and then you copy it to cell C2, it will still reference this particular cell A1 and also B1. All right. Now we can actually toggle between relative and absolute references using the F4 key on our keyboard, like while we are editing the formula. So understanding how to use these references effectively is very, very crucial for building complex and dynamic spreadsheet, right? For example, we may have something like a constant value, example, a pi, which most times is 22/7, as we know, right? 3.142 and some other recurring, like some decimal values there. So we may actually have this particular value, let's say the constant of a pi or any other constant in a cell, and we actually want to keep keeping that as a reference, or sorry to say, as an absolute value. So we keep it one place and then we begin to populate or build complex spreadsheet or maybe calculation sheet. So understanding the references is very important when you're working with Excel. So they allow you to create formula that can be copied across multiple cells and still maintain the correct references to the data. So let's quickly go to our data set to see how to apply these absolute and relative references to our data. All right, so this is an Excel sheet and we have some data imputed here. We have the quantity of this item. So we have individual cost. There's a total cost and also the sales tax. Then we have the sales tax to be 10%. So 10% of our total cost to give you the sales tax. Now we have the same here, but this is in different arrangement. If you look closely, we have these items arranged here, and then we have these other items arranged in the other way around. Okay, we want to see how these different locations we can actually use the references in different locations when we are working with data. So let's quickly look at the relative cells and how it works. Right, so use your equal sign and then let's multiply these two. So you notice what happens once you click on here and then multiply by this with your enter button, we see the value here, which is $210. Now, if you double click this cell, by default, we do not have that dollar sign included here because we are working with relative cells. So in relative cells, once you click and drag this down, so what happens is that if you look closely to here, we have these cells to be C2 multiplied by B2, which are these two different cells here. Now, once you drag this, once you move it to a different location, as we said before, it automatically readjusts itself from this B2 and C2 to B3 and C3. The same thing applies here. It moves down to C4 and B4 up to this C5 and B5. So that is how relative cells work. Now, if you do the same here, equal sign, let's multiply this by this. All right, and then we drag this to the end. We see that it has populated itself. From here, we had here, please take note, when we are moving from here, we're actually moving the row, okay, because here we have, this still remains our, if you look closely here, you see we have C3, B3, we have C4, B4. So the values C and B are constant, all right? It's only our rows that are changed, all right? So this is 3, this is row 2, and this is 5, but we have the C and B state constant. So that means here the columns here are constant, but in our case here, when we apply to this, there is difference in what in our different columns. This is column B, 10 and 9. This is column C, 10 and 9, right? This is column D. So there is change in our column here, but the row remains remain constant. This is all right. These are rows remain constant here. So we've actually seen how to use the relative cells. Now, when it comes to using mixed references, now we have our cell tax to be here. So if we use the same formula, let's say the formula for sales tax should be, let's say, equal sign, the total cost multiplied by the sales tax here. So hitting your enter button, you have this first value, but please take a closer look at what happens. Once you drag this value down, we have empty records here. Why? Because by default, Excel uses the relative reference. Because if you double click, the logic here is that, okay, move to the next cell. So we are now trying to calculate our value here, which is at D3 multiplied by H2. But our H2 here, we do not really have any value here. So multiplying by empty cell, that's why we have this dash here. All right, so in order for us to fix this, what we have to do is to introduce what is called the absolute reference. And for us to do that, you include a dollar sign. Please take note, you include a dollar sign. include a dollar sign. So the dollar sign that you are including here is going to affect the row 1. Please, you are trying to keep the row 1 as our absolute reference. So put your dollar sign here, that is before this one here. Please take note. So once you hit enter, we have our value, and then if you drag it down, we have the correct answers to this. So 10% of this will give us this value, 10% of this will give us this value. Now if you double click these cells, you notice what happens. Now these values here kept on changing location, but our value 10% here, because we applied this dollar sign before the row, please take note, this is our first row, that is 1. This is H. Please take note, the H here is for the column, while the 1 is for the row. So you apply the dollar sign to this particular row here, and that is why we have it fixed. So you can actually move that down here. Now, what of in the case of moving from left to right? So let's try that. Now, if you put the equal sign, this multiplied by this, hit enter, we have the correct value here. Now what happens when you move this? All right, we have inappropriate answer, inappropriate result here. So what happens if we now put the dollar sign here? If you put dollar sign here and then we move it across, you notice we still have incorrect answer to this. Why? Because we are not supposed to be fixing that here, right? We are not supposed to be putting the dollar sign here. So we're not supposed to be putting the dollar sign inside here. Where we're supposed to put the dollar sign is where we're supposed to put it outside here. So let's try it that we're trying to apply it to H, right? Because in this case, we are moving horizontally, all right, across different columns. So you would want this particular column to be fixed. Please take note. By default, this is going to be moving the values now. So if let's take a closer look. If you remove this and then you move this, all right. Now, if you open these cells, what happened? It moves to column. Instead of this H, it moved to I, okay. Multiply this, it moves to what? To J. It's trying to move to J here. And that is not really what we want. We want to fix it, apply it, fix it to this particular column. So for us to do that, we apply that dollar sign, right, to fix that one. So you just drag this, we drag this, and then we have our correct answer. All right, then there's another one we call the mixed references. All right, so let's return this to normal. So in the mixed references, you can actually combine two different, can actually places these two. All right, and then let's move to see what happens. So in order for you to prevent some of this error, most times you'd likely apply it to the two of them. All right, and as we also said, you can use the key F4 to change from one, by pressing your function key, one type of reference to the other. All right, so this is the default, this is the relative. All right, this is the mixed, and all right, so this is the absolute reference. So this is how to use and play around with references, relative, absolute, and mixed references when it comes to the use of Microsoft Excel to write functions and formulas. So thank you so much, and I hope you understand this topic properly. All right, so see you in the next class.